Hello. First of all, this video is going to be slightly different from my others because I am responding to a video which was posted by a person who had freed himself from Islam. It's not going to be so much about leaving a religion as about how you red pill yourself and the pain that this involves. So I'm going to be talking about that. But before I do, I'm also going to say that I posted a video, I'll leave the link up here, to do with the Freedom Convoy in Canada. And behind me was playing a video I'd found, which was a very clever parody of the original Convoy video, you know, the Christopherson movie. And then when people tried to access the link to that, the video had disappeared. I checked and it indeed has disappeared. In fact, I did track it down, but it's private. Now, I don't know why, but I assume that YouTube didn't like it so much. Fortunately, I took a copy of that video. I have one right here on my computer. And I have tried to find out who made the video so I can ask if I have permission from them to post it. I certainly wouldn't try posting it on YouTube, but perhaps I could get it posted on Rumble. But it won't be for a while, and it won't happen unless I can find somebody responsible for it and find out why it went private. I mean, it might have gone private because there was something in there which I didn't see, which was personal, and the person didn't want to that to be on the internet. So, of course, I'm not going to do anything until I know the situation. All right, so back to this red pill on Islam video. I'm referring to him and his description of the problems he's had, but I want to say that it's not only, if you have no interest in Islam, then that's fine. It's also, you can use this as an example of what happens to anyone who chooses to get themselves out of some sort of an ideology, and that includes not only people who've left cultish religions, but political movements, like the Democrats, for instance. There are some people who've left the Democrats in America because they see they're wrong. But it's taken them a while to admit that to themselves. The people in Britain who voted Conservative for the first time in 2019 because they realised that the Labour Party, which they had previously always voted for, and their parents had previously always voted for, and their grandparents had previously always voted for, that they weren't going to do that because they could see it was wrong. Now, I know there are many people who say that they're disillusioned with the Conservatives, but we all know that they would have been a lot more disillusioned with the Labour Party. The fact is the Conservatives are, at the moment, the best we have. That's a rather sad thing to have to say, but yep, that's the truth. So let's get on with this blogger. He's called Apostate Aladdin, and this particular video... Now, where are my notes? I'll leave a link in the description. Okay, it's called A Kafir's Struggles, Existential Crisis. And he talks about his own problems when he ceased to believe in Islam. He wasn't talking about the physical and the psychological threats so much from his still Muslim family or from his friends who turned out not to be that friendly anymore, but he was talking about the upheaval in his own personality, about how his entire worldview was being shaken, and how the structure, which up until his disentanglement from that religion, had formed the basis for his life. Now, I just want to point out to some of you who may be aware of this only in a vague way. Islam is an all-encompassing system. Christians go to church on Sunday and then forget about, a lot of them, forget about religion for the rest of the week. But Islam is a legal system, and it's a praying religion, and it's also a philosophical outlook, and it's also a direction on how you do all sorts of things. For instance, how you eat, You're not supposed to use your left hand, for instance, for eating. You keep your left hand for functions that may apply to lower parts of your body, and that sort of thing. So it takes up everything of your existence. So leaving Islam is very difficult because almost everything you do reminds you of it. And indeed, for Apostate Aladdin, Islam formed the basis for his perception of life and everything he did, and even the purpose of his existence. Because in Islam, your only purpose in life, more than anything else, is to worship God. There is no other purpose. And everything you do has to be done in that context. And then dropping that, well, that has to be very confusing and harrowing, as Aladdin says. You know, imagine that you discovered one day that your father wasn't actually your father, and furthermore that he regularly beats your mother, and everyone around you knows that and justifies it, including your mother. So I want to send this message to Aladdin and to any of his followers who've confessed to him. You know, they send him private mails and messages. They've confessed to him to being plagued by the same sort of painful confusion and doubt after becoming Islam free. And just a minute, I want you to notice something about the terminology I'm using. I don't say leaving Islam or apostasy lightly. I try to avoid using them altogether, because they are both words that contain secondary meanings of running away or treachery and betrayal. Apostasy means betrayal. You look it up in the dictionary. It doesn't mean changing your religion. It means being traitorous. And these words are Apostate Aladdin, he uses it himself. These are words chosen by the Muslim world to stain any doubter with tones of treachery and abandonment. Such words are a very good example of the dark absurdity in which victims of persecution are forced to use terminology which has been chosen by their persecutors. And I try to avoid buying into that. Anyway, so when I say Islam free, I've never heard anyone use that, but that's what they should use. That's their terminology, not apostasy, which is the terminology of the imams and the sheikhs and all the religious authorities and even the brainwashed masses. So I'm going back to my main thread, which is a personal experience thing. Of course, I haven't left Islam, I was never in there, but I wanted to give you a piece of personal experience anyway. It's not to do with religion, but still, I think it's quite relevant. Okay, I'm British, as you will all know, but I did a couple of my university degrees at American universities. When I went to the USA, full of the certainties of my own British culture, I threw myself into the exotic world of American student life with great enjoyment. There was no problem with that. And I had a wonderful time for a few months. And then I started to find myself flagging. Gradually, I was being smothered by a quite astonishing pall of depression. I mean, real depression. It took about 9 months to get started, something like that. But by the end of that first year, I was assailed by all sorts of melancholy. There was confusion about my Britishness, puzzlement about my certainties, and I developed an overwhelming longing for Marmite. Now, I wouldn't mind. I can't say I was much of a Marmite aficionado when I was back home. I'd eat it occasionally. I didn't dislike it, but it was hardly a breakfast staple. But it got so bad that I even tried sprinkling salt. You know, Marmite's quite salty. I even tried sprinkling salt on some buttered bread to try and get that taste. It didn't work. I don't recommend it. What was happening to me, in fact, was what old-fashioned people would have called homesickness. I wasn't so far gone, though, that I couldn't observe and analyse what was happening to me, and I wasn't so far gone that I couldn't see what was going on among the other foreign students who frequented the same common room. I noticed they were having similar trouble, and at about the same time as well. That is, there were a couple of divorces within that first year, or very soon thereafter. One of them was a German couple I knew quite well, and I think the other one was a Danish couple, but I don't remember them too clearly. They weren't that often there. Another Brit of my acquaintance started drinking rather too much, and there were a few more things of that sort. Because the USA was a challenge to us all, the way of life, the worldview of the people, the cultural emphases, they were all so different from our European experience. And perhaps more shocking for the Brits, because we were supposed to be speaking the same language as well, and that's not exactly true either. We all had to deal with this and to come to terms with it. I no less than the others. Also, and this is probably important too, we were cut off from our families and our friends. And I can imagine that disconnecting from Islam would be, well, it would bring up similar feelings, with the whole problem exacerbated by childhood memories of the horrific torture stories of hell and damnation, which would, well, still be hanging around the mental attic of the newly Islam-free. At least I didn't have the additional burden of a lot of background thoughts that I'd be condemned to hellfire for all eternity because I wasn't at a university in Britain. I hasten to add, I'm not trying to convert anyone to any religion. I have enough problems in that regard of my own. All I wanted to do was to tell you people who've decided that Islam isn't for you, that the feelings you might be having, that awful sensation of the carpet being pulled out from under your feet, well, these feelings are natural, and it's not just to do with Islam. It's to do with just realizing that what you had before doesn't quite fit anymore. I survived my own soul quake like most people survive other sorts of quakes, and I got on with things. And I'm not saying that it was all buttercups and daisies, but despite the regrets at having lost previous certainties, well, I did grow as a person. And years later, I'm making videos that in most cases straddle the Atlantic because I understand both sides of it. That is also important. And in the case of Islam, if you want a purpose to replace the idea of serving Allah, then I can think of no more honourable metamorphosis than to become a rescue ladder thrown from the high window of a burning building. At that point, you're serving not a God which might or might not be a human construct, but you are serving humanity itself. Meanwhile, the pain that you and the Islam-free or the Labour voter free or the Democrat free might be suffering, well, it's to do with a readjustment of your worldview, and I'm sorry to say that any readjustment, relinquishing a faith, going on a diet, even learning a language, readjusting to almost anything, is never going to be a painless process. I can tell you that from personal experience. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com And whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.